The Denon Home 550 is a compact soundbar that can be added to the YAS ecosystem. Indeed, you can add a subwoofer or a set of rear speakers. But in this review, we'll be concentrating on the standalone soundbar unit, which can be found for roughly £450 in the UK and around $650 in the US. Throughout this review, I'll be comparing it to some of its rivals and indeed commenting to see how this actual soundbar performs on its own. Now, to kick things off, I do have to talk about the aesthetics of the soundbar, and indeed it is very small. In comparison to my 55-inch TV, I had no issues whatsoever when it came to a placement of it. Now, you can wall mount it if you so wish, so that is also an option. Now, I should mention that the fabric material that stretches around the soundbar does look pretty good, and for the plastic material that sits at the front and at the rear of the soundbar, it means that you're not going to have as many marks on it. Now, at the top of the soundbar, you have these touch sensitive buttons, which I'm not too fond of, but they have got a sensor as well, which means that they're not always activated. Now, should you want to control the soundbar from afar, of course Denon includes a little remote. It's very small and does feel a little bit cheap, specifically given the price of the soundbar, but nevertheless will do all the right actions that you wish. However, if you want further control, you'll actually have to download the YAS app. Speaking of which, through the app you have got the variety of sound modes, and a few will appear and disappear depending on your source. So for example, you might see Dolby Audio, Dolby Surround, and in brackets Movie, which will appear when you have got a Dolby signal. As for the input sources, they can be changed directly through the app as well, which is quite a handy inclusion. And as for the dialogue enhancer, it can be enabled or disabled and cycle through the modes, while night mode has got an on and off toggle only. Then you've got the quick select, which you can go through and customize your settings over here. You've got a volume toggle at the bottom in terms of like a slider. And if you were to tap these three little buttons, then you've got the equalizer. Here you can see I have added 2 notches to the treble EQ and then taken 3 notches off the bass EQ. It is a shame, however, that Denon has not included a multi-band equalizer and furthermore not separated the mid and high frequencies from the EQ. Now, moving on to the music tab, you can see there's a few different music providers that you can stream from. So for example, Amazon Music, Spotify or Tidal. Elsewhere, you can also cycle through the music that's currently stored on your phone, but I would prefer using a third-party player, such as PowerAmp on Android smartphones. Elsewhere, you can also cycle through and indeed control the music that's playing on a USB drive straight through the app. As you can see right there, I don't have anything selected. If we tap the cog icon on the top left-hand side, you have got a few different things that you can customize. So for example, the Amazon Alexa integration, and also check for software updates. Now, moving back through here, if we go on to the TV, it takes us back to the home screen, and here the little eye icon gives you an indication of the signal and the sound mode that's currently being in use, and therefore gives you an indication of the metadata that the soundbar is receiving, and it gives you a little bit of reassurance that you will play back the soundbar to the best of its capabilities. Now, moving on to connectivity, the soundbar has got HDMI, optical, USB and auxiliary inputs, as you might have noted through the app section. Elsewhere, you have potentially seen that there is also an HDMI ARC output, as one might expect from a soundbar. And as to connect over wirelessly, you can of course use Wi-Fi, whereby it allows you to access the music streaming services. But of course, if you don't want to do that and you still want to play back music wirelessly, you have got Bluetooth to fall back on. And by fall back on, I mean that you are limited to SBC codec only, and therefore it's the lowest quality Bluetooth codec that is available, and alas, Denon has not included the ability to connect over aptX, aptX HD or LDAC. Now, if you do want to connect over to your home network, you can also plug in the soundbar via the included Ethernet port, which can be quite handy if you're going to be streaming over music and indeed playing back music to your Denon soundbar. So with all of that in mind, we're going to get on to a sound demo, but before proceeding, I should just mention that the soundbar operates on a 4-channel configuration and has got 6 audio drivers, all of which are forward facing. Now here you've got 4 55mm mid-range drivers and 2 19mm tweeters. You do also have 3 passive radiators, 2 of which are found at the front and 1 of which is found at the rear. Now with that in mind, we'll be going on to a music demo. The song is from Priya J, titled Falling. You can find it down description below in case you're interested in hearing it or purchasing it yourself. And we'll also be going to a piece to camera, whereby I'll be presenting the Jaguar I-Pace on Totally EV and going through the dialogue modes. Do check out the annotations on your screen to ensure you understand which mode the soundbar is running on.
Young and soared high, then learned how to fly. It's the only way I know how to play this game to success. I'm not quite sussed it yet. When I reach the brink, don't stop to think. I always sink, and now I'm so high. The thing is, I imagine it's constantly racing 1,000 miles ahead. I'm living in my own mind. Next thing you know, I'm crawling. I'm way back to falling from so high. And from so high, I'm falling again. Next thing you know, I'm crawling, I'm crawling.
Now, given its premium price tag, one might expect a luxurious exterior design, and quite frankly, I think Jaguar have achieved it with the I-Pace. See, from the front, it's got that kind of aggressive look, and it's almost somewhat reminiscent to the XJ220, whereby its flared sort of bonnet and wings give it that sort of sportier edge. As for its side profile, you're treated with 18 to 22-inch alloys, which you can choose from, and the body-colored wheel arches and side skirts. So with the audio demo out of the way, let's get onto my subjective opinion. And first off, let's talk about that sub-bass response. And frankly, it's pretty easy to analyze this part of the review because the soundbar just does not have a sub-bass extension, specifically not in comparison to other soundbars in the market. Be it ones which are priced similarly or ones which are cheaper, all of which offer a much better low-end extension purely because they have a dedicated subwoofer unit which drives that low-end extension. And alas, that's not the case with the Denon soundbar. So in this respect, if you want the extra bass, you're going to either have to look at the other soundbars or indeed purchase the additional extra with the Denon soundbar and therefore get a better low-end extension. Now as for the mid-bass, it's actually pretty hearty. It actually reminds me of Denon products of yesteryear, in other words over 10 to 15 years ago, which actually have a pronounced mid-bass response. The same could be said about this soundbar. So much so that you might have noted through the EQ function on the app that I actually dialed down the bass quite significantly in order to counteract this. The mid-bass frequencies just felt a bit too pronounced, so much so that it was leaking into the mid-range and therefore taking away from the mid-range accuracy. Now as for the mid-range, it is a bit recessed and pushed back, and while you could EQ it through the treble, it means that you are adjusting the highs as well as the mids, and as a result I couldn't adjust more than few notches without it sounding harsh and sibilant at the top end. Now I just had to accept that it does have a V-shaped sound signature and it can't quite compete with soundbars out there that really truly excel in the mid-range tones. Nevertheless, I did still feel engaged when I was listening back to, let's say, Priya's vocals. And similarly, when I had the dialogue function, I was able to boost my vocals when I was presenting to camera on the Jaguar I-Pace review on Totally EV. The only thing to bear in mind over here, and it's something that you might have noted, is the fact that when you do enable the dialogue function, it somewhat boosts the overall sound of the soundbar, making it somewhat a little bit loud. So therefore, unless you're listening to pure broadcasts, so for example, news, podcasts, or let's say a piece to camera, then anything else that has some sort of action in it will kind of throw you off. So you might want to actually disable the dialogue function altogether and therefore just accept that this has a somewhat pushed back mid-range tone. Now as for the highs, they're unsurprisingly well extended at the top end due to the fact of those two 19mm tweeters, and as I did mention, if you do EQ it a bit too much, it becomes harsh or sibilant. But without too much EQ, it is still very lively and will definitely keep you engaged, be it if you're consuming music, movies, or indeed gaming. Now the biggest disappointment for me, however, was the overall soundstage. Now I'll get onto my subjective opinions just shortly because I want to give you a little audio demo, which I understand is not going to be ideal over YouTube, but it'll give you potentially a taster. I'll be using some snippets from Transformers Age of Extinction, and I'll also be cycling through the different metadatas that are available and including the different sound modes through the app. So do check out the annotations down on your screen to make sure that you understand how the soundbar is running. I appreciate that audio demo was a little bit repetitive, but it hopefully gave you an indication of how the soundbar performed in the different modes. What I will say with the overall height and depth information is that the lack of upward and sideward firing drivers on the Denon Home 550 makes me really question its overall Dolby Atmos or DTS-X certification. Indeed, here you'd expect a soundbar with those certifications to have those drivers and indeed give you a real room-filling experience. But unfortunately, the Denon Home 550 cannot compete with soundbars that do have those physical drivers or have a means of reproducing that height information. Now, as for the overall instrument separation, it is okay. Don't get me wrong, it's perfectly fine when it comes to listening to more stereo-based format music, but when it comes to enjoying movies and yet again comparing it to most of its rivals, I felt that the Denon Home 550 just didn't really give me that level of instrument separation that I was expecting, specifically from an audio brand such as Denon with such pedigree. What I'm really trying to convey in this review is that Denon Home 550 isn't a bad sounding soundbar. It's just that its overall price point just doesn't make sense in comparison to what else you can find out there. Be it from the likes of Yamaha, Panasonic, JBL or Samsung, all of these manufacturers produce a really good and compelling soundbar solution for your living room, or of course even if you're going to use it as a desktop solution. Frankly, I just can't see myself recommending the Denon Home 550, and I really wish that Denon would bring down the overall asking price to make it a lot easier to recommend for those people who want a compact form factor soundbar. But of course, that's just my subjective opinion about the soundbar, so I'd be intrigued to hear your thoughts in a comment section below. And of course, if you like this video, drop a like, subscribe, and hit that bell notification, all of which would be greatly appreciated. As such, I've been Totally Dubbed, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye.